what we have on the other two. So I apologize to anyone who is planning to do this on LinkedIn. We'll still upload this as usual on Spotify and Anchor until we get connected onto the other platforms. My name is Patrick Hoban. I am your host of the Pat Hoban Experiment. The goal of this podcast, live streaming now, thanks to Riverside, is to test out new technology. I'm on a journey to write a book. I had a goal for this year to write a book by the end of the year and planned on doing it one podcast at a time because I'm not a fan of sitting down and writing, but I do enjoy public speaking. So this is an opportunity to test drive public speaking and take it to the next level. When we started this a couple episodes ago, one was just dialogue by myself. This go around, we are going to do a live stream, which we're in the process of right now. I've got it connected to a couple of different platforms. I'm really interested to see if people comment, if they come through Riverside, or if I need to bounce back and forth between Facebook and also Twitch to see if things are coming in. But either way, we are recording this, so it will end up in a podcast format, which eventually we will chop up into smaller pieces onto YouTube, then use some software to convert it into text. The text will take over to a blog, and then the blog will turn into a book. So hopefully 3 different books. But what today's topic I was really hoping to cover is actually a presentation I'm going to give tomorrow. So I thought this would be a good time to go over a test run of the presentation, but then also be able to outline the book. You know, the first book is going to be on personal development. I'm not sure on the title yet. I've got a couple I've played around with, but the outline for tomorrow's speech, luckily for me, they asked for a presentation, a motivational speech on stronger or resilience. And that really falls in line with what I wanted to do on this podcast. So I'm using the presentation as an outline format in 3 different sections. And from there, I will be able to hopefully have on guests that can back up some of the stories and give their examples. But before we get too far into this, I did talk about the purpose for anyone that's joining. Is to create this podcast, create this live stream, test out different technology along the way, and figure out if we can create content using all the different systems that are out there, Riverside being one of them I'm on, combined with Anchor to launch the podcast, and then using Facebook and Twitch, try to get LinkedIn. Also, it's hooked up to YouTube right now. I haven't checked to see if that one's running or not, but I'm curious to know that if somebody does type into chat, if it comes back around into Riverside, or if I need to monitor each one of the platforms at the same time. But for now, we'll just continue the live stream as is, and then I'll check everything for questions towards the end. And then hopefully we'll have some good audio out of this either way that we could put into a podcast. But for today's dedication, the first one we did was definitely to my girls. I wanted to thank them for, basically giving my motivation, my inspiration to do this and be a better man. And then the last episode was to Jeremy Evans, opportunity for him to talk about a film that he is in the middle of raising funds for. So anyone that listened to the last episode that wants to get into Hollywood investing, backing a film, he's got a great product that is out right now, I believe, heading out over in Europe. It will be here in the States pretty soon, but he's in the process of raising funds for a new film. If you hadn't had a chance to listen to that or learn more, please check out the last episode. I'll put a link in the show notes. For this one, though, since we are talking about stronger and we're talking about resiliency, I wanted to dedicate this one to Joe Hensley. It's a buddy of mine that we used to work in the restaurant industry together. And everybody's had ups and downs in life, mine included, which is why I think this is going to be a good one for him right now. But I want to go over the slides themselves. So let's see if I can do a share screen via Riverside. And have not shared a screen yet. Wow, that is an interesting technique. All right, let's see what this one does and see if we can do full screen from here. Okay, so this looks a little bit different than Zoom, which I've used before, which has controls at the top. It looks like Riverside's is at the bottom and not as many controls, but hopefully everyone can see the screen. This is the slide deck that I'm going to use tomorrow in this presentation for Martin Luther King Day. Probably one of the greatest public speakers of all time. And he was an example for us in Toastmasters whenever I got started in public speaking. And it was really not just the words that he was saying, because they're very powerful, but he did a really good job at the rate and owning the pause and the variation. So not just the speed, but also the variation. So they're really driving the point home. There's a lot you can learn from listening to Martin Luther King speeches. So as we mentioned, this speech is going to be for Prairie State Bank. We're doing this tomorrow. This is going to be a test run just to see timing wise and see if it makes sense. Hopefully get a little bit of feedback towards the end. But the goal is what makes us stronger. It's going to be fun to try to do this without a clicker because my mic is literally sitting right in front of, that's not going to work, the controls. So the theory when it comes to resiliency is that it's a cycle. Hard times create strong people create good times, and then good times create weak people, and then weak people create hard times. This is not just as a society, but us individually. If you're coming out of a hard time, you become stronger for it, more resilient. And then I think you start to take a lot of things for granted. I've done that myself. I've overcome working multiple jobs, going to school at the same time. And it's amazing what you can do when you put your mind to it. And then you start to get really comfortable. And not to say that it's making, me individually weak, but I know that I can be doing more if I put more pressure on. I am a procrastinator for sure. So if there is a deadline, and the more that I get going on at the same time, the more stress that I put myself under, the better I end up being and the more I end up producing. So it's almost self-inflicted deadlines. But the theory with this one, especially for this audience that we're having, is that coming out of the pandemic, heck, not just the pandemic, but 20, 21, 22, there's been some rough times across the board when you think about the lockdowns, when you think about the overall pandemic itself, masking, not masking, and then now the economy, the ripple effect from that. While things could be getting somewhat better, I think that we're learning a lot. And a lot of the goal of this as well is my philosophy of winning or learning, never losing. So as long as you're learning along the way and we're adjusting based off of things that have happened in the past, that's how you end up being stronger. So the agenda for this speech, really starting with why. This is right out of the book, just why, how, and what. But starting with why are we here, and then all of the how-tos. So this is going to be a long guide, and the guide itself is the breakdown of the book that I'm wanting to write on personal development. And then what's next is what you can do with it. So, what I plan to do with it. This is also for me and you as the audience, but for me, just to be able to check in and remember my why and remember my how-to and the whole purpose of what we're doing this in the first place. So the whys, it's funny whenever you think about the 5 why technique, and this is something from 6 Sigma process improvement, where if you ask why enough times, you're trying to get down to the root cause. So it reminds me of little kids. Little kids will ask why, because they really want to understand, they're not happy with that first one, and we shouldn't be either. So the 5 why concept, we're working right into why we're here today, as me as the speaker for this audience that's coming out. But for me, it's we're here to discuss resilience. We talked about it earlier that we're coming out of a pandemic, and why me though? At this point, I'll have been given an introduction. I'm the CEO of the Bloomington Normal Economic Development Council. And why am I here today is because we have gone through a lot of things family-wise that have been a challenge, have been a struggle. And it's something that has definitely made me stronger during a time in my life when I took things for granted. So I was not raised as some of these motivational speakers in a hard situation. I had a great upbringing, upper middle class. I'm right in central Illinois, had great parents, great learning opportunities. Definitely not, silver spoon in my mouth or anything, but we didn't really go without wanting anything. So it was something that had a lot of opportunity. No real complaints at all, so it's not like a Rocky story where you're struggling from the get-go and you've been born with this fight. I think it was something that was instilled with us by our parents, having that fighting attitude and building character, which was funny because as a kid, I played football from 4th grade on, even got into wrestling, and I never knew why my parents wanted me to play football, but they'd always says that it builds character. Never knew what that meant, but now as a football coach going back, I totally understand the character that goes with it and has to do with work ethic and, being able to see that, all your hard work and your teamwork does pay off if you work towards a common goal. So back to that win or never lose philosophy, that's been instilled in me, basically from early on going through high school, having a lot of football scholarships, taking those for granted too, thinking that they'd always be there. Went to ISU for 1 year, had way too much fun, which is it's pretty funny now looking back at Illinois State University, because my office as CEO of the EDC, I stare at my old dorm. So my old dorm is right out the window. But at the time, I was having way too much fun in college, not prioritizing grades, but all the extracurriculars, to which at that time, I think my parents thought it was the best to come home and go back to community college. So I ended up not making it through my first year of college for having too much fun, not being a very good role model to my little brother Keith, who's on the screen right there. But going to community college from there and still fumbling my way through community college, I think it got to the point where I might have gotten 1D, but I mean, I really failed out of community college too, because there was really no priority in my life. Luckily for me, I did run into my wife, Sarah, and we had a beautiful baby girl, and that really gave me a sense of purpose. So things were starting to come back along, hitting back into school and starting to get straight A's. So I went from being a community college dropout and ISU dropout to really focusing on what mattered, which was my family and being the best that I could be. From there, though, I knew I could be more. And my little brother Keith had always mentioned that he was amazed at the amount of potential that I could waste and still end up on top. And of course, at the time, I just shrugged it off. I was a bartender. He was a bartender. Taking 1 to 2 classes at community college, knew I could be better. He was going to ISU at the time. I think he was in his junior, senior year, getting closer to that. But as a bartender, he was living a similar lifestyle that I was, which was, later nights, not fully applying ourselves. And him and his friends ended up going out on the town in Peoria one night in central Illinois. And I remember getting a phone call the next day from one of his really good friends. And he'd asked if I had seen him. And I had no, of course. I had not heard anything from him. And so I had, followed up thinking no big deal. He'll turn up. And another day went by. Nobody had heard anything. So we ended up, forming somewhat of a search party and printing out different flyers and scanning the campus at Bradley University and getting all over Peoria just to figure out, what the heck happened to him. And to this day, honestly, we still don't know. The last footage I believe that exists is him walking away from one of the bars. He was sitting outside and the bouncer had basically said, you can't sit there. So he got up and just walked away, and that was it. He walked away, and we have not found him since. And to me at that time, being a young father, had my lovely wife to support me and my friends, but it really, really put a fire in me, which I've never really had before. It was something that at that age, young 20s, you think you're invincible. I'm sure he thought he was invincible, and I definitely did. And you start to realize how fragile life is, and that all of us have an expiration date or a clock, and you don't know what's going to happen. So from there, I ended up going back to school. I ended up going to Millikin University. I ended up majoring in organizational leadership, which went along with economic development pretty well at the time, and became this commencement speaker. And to learn more about, the history of my brother and, where we're at today with that, I'll put more links in the show notes. But it's also another reason I wanted to do more public speaking and get this story out there, because in my heart of hearts, I believe he's still out there wondering. And so hopefully if anybody sees this or recognizes him, they can also reach out. But back to the drive side and why I'm here. This is something that, I didn't apply myself before. This had happened as much as I could. And I think that the word potential is almost a dirty word in my book. It's not something that I ever want people to say is he had a lot of potential. I want people to think that and understand that I've exceeded my expectations and hopefully lived up to my brothers. So I've from Millikin, commencement speaker, ended up jumping up and taking another job, a huge raise after that. Worked my way up to Chicagoland, where luckily we weren't too far away from the University of Notre Dame. Applied myself even further and ended up getting a master's in business analytics from Notre Dame, which opened up another position of being CEO of the Bloomington Normal Economic Development Council. So for me, in about 10 years, I went from being a college dropout bartender to the CEO of an economic development organization. And it was really based off of this drive. I knew that I could be more, and my brother going missing really put an emphasis on that, and a drive combined with my girls and my family really being a guide and making sure and holding me accountable. But I ended up coming with a plan, which we'll go into, throughout this as well. But this is why I'm here speaking today. It's because once I figured out my why, my drive, I found out my direction, and then I applied discipline. And I believe that this is just the beginning on where we could take this. So now you might be asking, why am I doing this speech? Why is it public speaking for strong people? So for the third why, I believe that strong people create strong businesses. And if you have strong businesses, then you can have a strong community. And my business is economic development. So the stronger our people, the stronger our companies, and the stronger our communities will be, and then our economy will, again, almost like myself, exceed expectations. So the how. So like I mentioned earlier, the whole drive, direction, discipline, it's really broken down to these three things. Oversimplification, giving you 3 items, same thing I used to do to my football players. Odd numbers, end up being something that we can all remember compared to even numbers. That's a trick that we learned in Toastmasters, having 3 to 5 topics whenever you break things down. So I run with that power of 3 multiple times. So the drive, Martin Luther King Day, I'm definitely using this quote. No one really knows why they are alive until they know what they'd die for. My drive itself is just to be the best man, the best father, the best husband that I could be, and leave this place and pretty much any community I've worked in better than I found it. So that is my drive. That is something that my why that I have to check back in on. Not too often, because I'm pretty motivated now compared to what I used to be. And really the difference between motivation and inspiration is something that we have to talk about, because in this speech, I'm a motivational speaker. Like, I'm this temporary thing to get you to hopefully, check in on yourself and really find your inspiration. And your inspiration is what's internal. That's your drive. And you can get inspired from other people, but you have to own that. And so definitely get inspiration from my family. But motivation is why we're here today. And that's almost like the push, where inspiration is the pull. So the drive itself and passion. So passion is, if you thought right now, like, okay, you just won the lottery, and there's been some big ones that are out there, but money's no longer an object, and you can do anything you want with your time. That's your passion. If you can get paid for it, that's like the ultimate job. So you really need to ask yourself, and there's different scenarios you can do. Strength Finder is one. If you just do a Strength Finder quiz, it'll show you, what you like doing, and then you can maximize your strengths. But I think the exercise of going and buying that lottery ticket and sitting down and writing everything out that you would do with it, I mean, not really focusing on the actual job or the actual end goal, but the process. Like, focus on the process of how you would spend your day. Because if you say, if money was an object, you play golf, is that really fulfilling, or is that just temporary? For me, my passion is in problem solving. Like, I love puzzles. I love strategy. I love strategic games. I almost enjoy getting the rules for a game just so I can try to figure out a strategy rather than playing the game later on. I love just solving puzzles. So I found out early on that strategy was huge. Analytics, reviewing information, and then that becomes another puzzle. So if you have the puzzle and then you execute it, you execute the plan for it, and you get more data back, that's another puzzle. And it's like never ending. So the whole strategy and analytics for me, I love it, and can find myself on the weekends sometimes just crunching numbers in R, a programming platform for analytics on football for no reason at all. I don't ever really publish any of the results. It's fun to me to come up with new ideas and see if my theory or my hypothesis is right based off the data. So for me, I found mine pretty early, like what I'm passionate about doing. And then after that, almost back to my first slide with my family, finding your purpose. The other day, instead of saying, how are you doing, or what do you do for a living? Somebody asked me, what my purpose was. And I was like, what do you mean my purpose? Like, that's an interesting way to start things. And it was like, no, like, what do you fight for? What's your cause? Like, everybody has a cause. And I was like, oh, that's very interesting. And so to me, it's definitely my family, but then also with this, even the podcast, why I'm doing this is I think that, if I can share my knowledge the way that other people have shared their knowledge with me, and that mentoring capacity, that we could end up all being better and leave this place better than I found it, and better than we found it, which is the ultimate goal. So that's what I fight for, is just not just, my family and the economies that I'm working for, but I think that other people, if they could learn economic development, it'd make all of our lives a little bit easier, and we could all be better versions of ourselves and have better communities themselves. So that's my why right now. And then if you think about a mission, and speaking to a bank, I mean, you guys we're going to have their own mission statement. I don't know if there's going to be a new one or not, but the only thing that's missing out is the equation at the bottom, and that is, if you have your passion, you've got your purpose, and you know what you're doing, and then the passion is how you're going to do it. Purpose is why you're doing it. But the mission also needs aspiration, and that's the next step, which is normally done in a vision statement. So you accomplish your vision through passion and purpose. So you combine those to get your mission. So the next phase we're going to look into is the direction itself. And with direction, this ends up being your path, because there's multiple ways that you can get to a location. So right now I'm in Illinois, and say I want to get to San Diego. Now I can get out there via train. I can get out there via plane. I can drive. I can bike. I might die. Walk, run like Forrest Gump. But there's multiple ways you can get there, methods, but then there's also different routes that you can take. So you think about the direction, you look at your current standpoint, where you're at, you look at who you could emulate or who's done it before to show you the way, and then what tools or path did they take. So if this is just a simple strategic planning where you look at your current state or your standpoint, your future state, your goal, which is who you'd like to emulate, and then the tools or path that they use to get there. So right off the bat, starting with your standpoint, this is something that I think that I personally have to work on, because I know my standpoint, I know where I'm at, but understanding other people's standpoint as well from their point of view. Because I think it was Brene Brown asked the question, are people really the best? Are people really doing the best that they can from their point of view? And I think that they are. And a lot of times, I wish that they were seeing things from my point of view, but we all have different backgrounds. We all have different challenges. So I believe in, checking myself at the door and reminding myself that, okay, from their point of view, I can't expect them to be where I'm at. I have to, meet them where they are. And that's something I'm definitely working on this year is whenever, depending on who I'm talking to, it really helps eliminate any arguments or confusion and changes the way that I deliver information, hopefully from their point of view. So I take that into consideration. But for this purpose, when we're thinking about how we're going to get anywhere, it doesn't matter what your goal is, you need to assess where you're at right now. So before you get started, you've got this aspiration of where you want to go. Really line up your strengths. So back to that strengths finder we were talking about earlier. What do you enjoy doing that you can maximize, in order to get there? But then also, what could keep you from getting there? If there's certain obstacles that are in your way. And what skills do you have to get there? So already, if you think about what you enjoy doing, what your background is, your experience, what have you learned that can get you there, take an overall assessment of where we're at right now at the starting point or our standpoint. Now, the next one is, this is usually a goal, but to me, I think you can fast forward to the next step a little bit and just find someone who's done it before, find that mentor, who's done it, who has reached your aspiration. Once you've got them in mind, and another thing with this is you can have multiple things. I don't recommend just hyper focusing on one thing. Don't just focus on your career. If you're an artist, focus on your art. Doesn't matter if it's music, doesn't matter if it's painting, even when I'm doing podcasting now, I research a lot of other podcasters to see, how they're doing it, what tools that they're using, what techniques that they're doing. So finding someone that is in that, that goal that you want to get to, they're already doing it, your aspiration, and line up the strengths that they have. What strengths do they have compared to what you have? What obstacles did they overcome? Is this something that you can avoid? Can you learn from their mistakes? Which is easier said than done. Even as a CEO now, I try to let people know, especially my employees, hey, I do it this way because, this happened before, and, hopefully you can learn from me. Same thing with parenting. But, what we learned at Notre Dame is you have to have your aha moment. There's multiple times whenever we would be struggling, our entire cohort with different lines of code in order to solve a problem. And I remember thinking to myself, am I in the right class? This is way, way too hard. And you get through the entire thing, and you eventually figure it out. And I remember getting there and they just had all the solutions and the entire list of code. And I was like, why wouldn't you just give us this to start with? And we could learn from the best. And they said, well, then you don't have your aha moment. We're trying to get you to an aha moment. If you just give everybody the answers, it's not going to resonate. So, those obstacles themselves that they overcome, you can probably learn from them, but a lot of times you need to learn yourself. So that so having your own ha-ha moments along the way. And then what skills did they use to overcome? Now, this is one where if you do find yourself in a pickle, again, Google is your friend, having these phones on us 24/7, even Chat GPT now, or GPT, you can actually ask anybody anything and probably find a best practice. I mean, even back when I had my Jeep Wrangler, I would use YouTube to, overcome any obstacle that happened within the engine. I fixed it many times. So there's plenty of tools out there to overcome the obstacles when you do run into them, if you can't avoid them. And then the last one is the direction itself. So the tools or the path. And to do this is where you start comparing, what strengths are you missing? So that would end up being your weaknesses. So if you found someone who got there that is really strong in certain areas that you're not, just be aware what your weaknesses are. Those obstacles that we mentioned before that they hit, keep an eye out for them. And then what skills do you need to learn to overcome the obstacles? And so this is where you start identifying these gaps. So you've got your starting point, you've got your finishing point, and then you need to figure out the gap in between and then how you're going to close that gap. And if you really look this section again, it's really a SWOT analysis. So all businesses identify their strengths, their weaknesses, their opportunities, and their threats. This is the same thing, this exercise that we just went through for yourself, performing a personal SWOT analysis, ideally, once a month, hopefully by the end of the year. And if you haven't done it, you can do it right now. But find out, where you're at compared to where you want to be. And then once you've got that lined out, you know the path you need to take. So it's oversimplified in that manner, but that's really it. It's knowing, how you can get there and then staying on the path, which leads into our next one, which is discipline. And discipline is often almost a dirty word. I mean, I remember being in football and wrestling, like they had to use discipline to motivate us, to get us on task. But self-discipline is actually a really, really good thing. And especially today, it's something that I think more people need to have, especially myself. I find myself staring at my phone, playing games, total waste of time, unless I set aside time to play the game. But we are distracted as a society now. And this is where you might have your motivation. You might have that internal drive. You might know the path that you're supposed to take, but because we're so distracted, we're, playing around on social media, getting caught in our echo chambers, not really checking in. You might be checking in work-wise, like we have weekly meetings, so everybody's checking in. But how often do we actually personally check in? And I think that's something that, at the beginning of the day, at the end of the day, write down, what you're grateful for. Write down what you want to accomplish and check in. And this is why I really believe in meditation, yoga. Self-help itself is huge. But to do that, there's another 3-step process. So an overall debrief, going through some reflection, and then the revisions. So right off the bat, debrief. This is hard to do because a lot of people, including myself, like to skip to the next step. So the debrief is just anything that you're working on, what actually happened. Don't include any opinions. Don't include the why you think it happened or how you got there. Just write down the outcomes of the day, the outcomes of the project, the month. Write down what happened without any of the outside noise. And that's where the reflection comes in. So reflection is where you start using your opinions and getting other people's opinions on how we got to certain places. So you want to know what worked, what didn't work, and then what you can do differently. I even spend time showering, thinking about arguments and how they could have gone in different ways. And it is, in my mind, is a good thing to do that at a set time, but then you have to let it go. And I think that's the harder part, is not being able to let it go. And so if you're thinking about what happened in the past, if I would have said this, if we would have did that, coulda, woulda, shoulda, something that my dad always said, if the dog wouldn't have stopped, it would have caught the rabbit. But it's one of those things where it's almost a waste of time and you get stuck in the spin cycle and then doing the same thing, looking at the future. So before giving a presentation, you start over analyzing, you get paralysis by analysis, which is what had happened this entire time with this podcast. I wanted to start back in October. I've been saying I've been wanting to write a book for the past almost 10 years. I almost guarantee it. As soon as I got into economic development, I became a certified economic developer. I was like, this stuff to me is fascinating. Maybe not to the rest of the world, but I bet there's a lot of people that are civic minded that would want to know how this works. So paralysis by the analysis is just looking at best case, worst case scenarios on repeat. So the reflection phase is just setting up time to do that. Get it on a piece of paper, get it, online if you're using Evernote or some other, even just your text app, your notes app on your phone. Just get it out of your head, on the piece of paper, so you don't have to worry about it anymore. But once you've got that all lined out, then you can revise. And I don't think we try to revise, but we get stuck in our ways. And so it's one thing to have a plan, to stay the course. I do believe in staying the course, but if things aren't working, you have to be able to pivot. And so going through this list of things on, what actually happened, why you think that they happened, and what you could do differently, then you start working on, what should you change? Should you change any of this? Should you reprioritize? So checking back in on the path itself, through the direction, but then also check back in on your why. I mean, in the very beginning, maybe that drive changed. Maybe, as the science changes, your priorities change, you have new information. So you have a new standpoint, because the standpoint that I had at 14 years old is different than 22 years old, and it is different from now. So you have to check in on a regular basis to see what's changed and is it a priority anymore. So if it's not worth your time, stop doing it. So the concept itself, oversimplified, but it's drive, direction, and discipline, and having that discipline to check in on that drive, to check in on that direction, and to keep this going, ideally on a daily basis. If you do, you're going to overcome anything that's out there that's a challenge, anything that you're going through. Know that people have done it before. And the beauty of having the internet today is you have so many examples. You can get on YouTube and type in pretty much anything you want and see someone that's gone through it. Motivation's there, inspiration's there, all that different how-tos, and hopefully this can be a part of that. And this is something I actually thought about starting with the end in mind. But whenever people think about growth and they see, where you're at with your title and, graduating college and any of the accolades that you want to get, they think that it's steady growth. So like, you're just building off of the last time over and over and over. This is what normally people think happens when this is closer to reality. So if you think about, the green is you're going up, and then the red is a challenge or something terrible that's happened in your life, and it sets you back. And this goes right back to the end of the win or learn. It's like you have to learn from those mistakes, and you can start to overcome. So you gradually get better. It is not a straight path to the top. And if there are people that have done that, there's many times where they crash. There's a lot of pro athletes that have always been the best at whatever that they do, and they get all the way to the NFL. There's a great special, I'll have to think of the name of it, on ESPN, about how they end up going bankrupt, after about 1 or 2 years, because everything was just a straight shot to the top. They thought it was always going to be there. Then eventually it's not. And I think that this is closer to reality, that there are more struggles, more failures, and people get stronger as they go, whatever that target is. So the what side for me, I implemented this in order to solve problems. So anything I'm going through, this is the process that I take. I also do this to calculate risk. So what I was mentioning earlier about the best and the worst case scenario. So I might have a solution, but I look at the unintended consequences on what could come from that. And then from there, I make a calculation on whether it's worth doing or not. And then the free will side is just a reminder of what you can do. Checking in on just your drive, your direction, and discipline at any second, and knowing that you can pivot at any second on any day. You can change your path. It's just like whenever I woke up January 1st, I said, you know what, I'm doing the podcast today, and I turned the thing on, and here we are. So we're trying to keep the discipline to push these out every Sunday, maybe keep the streams going. I'll see what kind of questions or how this tech even works, if it's worth doing it this way. One would have more guests on for sure, but the free will side is really there to let you know that you have a choice. And then the last slide is to follow up for anyone who's interested in learning more. Hopefully they can tune into this podcast, follow me on Twitter, and then check out LinkedIn as well. And with this one, there won't be any questions because it is an up and down speech. It is interesting talking to a bank and not the doing an economic update. Most of the time when I do bank conversations, it's all based off of the economy. Okay, so back on to the studio itself. It doesn't look like any comments or questions came through. I'm going to go end up and checking the other ones. But timing wise, about 37 minutes. I started with 7 minutes in, so 30-minute speech. I might have to go longer in a couple areas because I think they slated about 40 minutes for me. A lot of times whenever I build speeches up, especially slides, I try to come up with the averages. So if it's going to be a 40-minute presentation, I try to average about 2 minutes per slide. So some slides will be longer, other ones shorter. I've got my phone in front of me with my notes, and then I will build up. A lot of the headers will go longer, so from the sections themselves, so I can time out my presentations that way. That's another trick when it comes to Toastmasters. All right, more notifications here. Nope. Nothing is telling me that that is going live. So I don't think LinkedIn went through. I don't know. Looks like, okay, so Facebook did go through, and looks like there is some comments. So it's like, good morning, allow time for questions. Yeah, there'll be questions at the end. We could do them now. But it's interesting that, so 33 minutes ago, this text came in, or this into the messenger, but it did not come through Riverside. So that is good to know for future ones. And then we check in on Twitch. Don't know if anything came through from here. Looks like a first time chat came through, and it's a way to boost my audience. That's something I might follow up on later on. All right, so I'm not sure if I've got YouTube. So this could be an opportunity to get a moderator, which I think Riverside says that you can have somebody else log in at the same time to monitor the questions and possibly put them in. Looking at YouTube now, I'm not even sure where the heck that would be streaming. Oh, there it is. Solo cast. One video, public. Oh, this one might have started and stopped. Nope, it says it's live right now. Interesting. And one. Ooh, I need to turn the volume off. Interesting. Okay, so it does look like YouTube did work, and Twitch worked, and Facebook worked, but LinkedIn I did not get to connect. And then also good to note that the chats themselves did not come through Riverside, so I wonder how I need to set that one up. Overall, though, pretty cool. I think it did what I was hoping it was going to do. Note to self, though, whenever I launch this thing, I need to go back through the other systems. So Facebook, Twitch, and Twitch and YouTube, I think, launched on their own. I think Facebook, I had to hit go live to turn it on. And LinkedIn, I'm honestly not sure why that one's not connecting. It gave me an opportunity, and it might have been the setup itself, because I did set it up and then ended up trying to set up another one. So it might have a couple different URLs and codes. So we'll try that one again at a later date, and maybe just that one alone, not all of them at the same time, to see how that one works. All right. Yep. Okay, so that is the end of this one. Interesting test or experiment in live streaming. Thanks everybody for tuning in. And we'll hopefully get back to guests next week. Then I will get this thing uploaded, chopped up, and put into text format so we can take some lessons out of that. Maybe even do some shorter format videos on YouTube. But it's, again, I'm here to create content following Gary V's method, where you create multiple videos out of one video or one presentation, and then we'll see how we can use that later on into smaller bits. If you have any questions or any suggestions for guests, let me know, or other topics. But from then, I will see you next time, and do great things.